commence our session. I request all the participants to please take your seats and the speakers to join us on the stage. Please settle down. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Komal Khan, Research Officer, Strategic Vision Institute, Islamabad. We are going to commence our first session titled Global Technology Dynamics. Technological advances have significantly bolstered military capabilities with rapid progress in disruptive technologies that have been fundamentally transforming contemporary warfare and strategy and are poised to play a crucial role in future conflicts. Together, we seek to analyze global technology dynamics and their profound implications for the evolving global order. The session will be moderated by Dr. Adil Sultan. Dr. Adil is the Dean of Faculty of Aerospace and Strategic Studies, Acting Chair of the Department of Strategic Studies, and the co-founder of the Center for Aerospace, and the co-founder of the Strategic Foresight for Asia. Previously, he was director at the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies and a visiting research fellow at the Center for Science and Security Studies, King's College, London. Our first conference speaker for this session would be Ms. Ghazala Yasmin. Ms. Ghazala Yasmin Jalil is research fellow at Arms Control and Disarmament Center, Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. With extensive experience in arms control and disarmament, she has made significant contributions to the field through national and international publications, including book chapters. Her research focuses on contemporary trends in arms control, with particular emphasis on the outer space, this space nuclear nexus, the interplay of AI and nuclear deterrence, hypersonic missiles, India's ballistic missile defense system, missile developments, and the dynamics of the South Asian nuclear arms race. Ms. Ghazala will be presenting her conference paper titled Hypersonic Missile Race, Regional and Global Implications. Our second conference speaker for this session would be Mr. Ahmed Ali. Ahmed Ali is Research Associate at Strategic Vision Institute, Islamabad. His areas of research include emerging military technologies and cybersecurity. Mr. Ahmed Ali will be presenting his conference paper titled Drone Warfare and Threshold of the Use of Force. Our third conference speaker for this session would be Mr. Ali Abbas. Mr. Ali Abbas is Research Officer at Balochistan Think Tank Network, BTTN, Quetta. His research interests include information and psychological warfare, nuclear deterrence, and emerging technologies with a particular focus on hypersonic weapons and Iran's ballistic missile program. Mr. Abbas will be presenting his conference paper titled Hypersonic Weapons and the Future of Strategic Stability Between the Nuclear Rivals. I would now hand over the session to Dr. Adil. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Komal. So thank you, Brigadier Salik, for organizing this event. I'm happy that finally nuclear weapons in South Asia और strategic stability से आगे निकल आए हैं. So we are talking about something which is futuristic. और this will add, as जैसे इनके remarks में था, कि this will add learning to the young scholars जिन्होंने इन चीज़ों को deal करना है future के अंदर. I have a short presentation because I was allotted 10 minutes. तो वो मुझे लगा कि obligatory है तो मैंने 10 minutes करने हैं. लेकिन what I'll do is I'll pen my presentation या जो remarks है towards the end. Okay, first I don't want to steal that thunder from the young scholars, emerging scholars. ये अपनी presentations कर दे and then I'll give my perspective on these emerging and disruptive technologies जिस तरह से हम इसको study करते हैं. So I'll request Ms. Ghazala Jalil to be the first speaker, please.
इधर से होगा ना? ठीक है. Assalamu alaikum and good morning. I am really grateful to SYI for giving me this opportunity to speak here. I really don't know how I ended up among all these young scholars, but I did. So today I'll be talking about hypersonic missile race, regional and global implications. So there has been rapid advancements in hypersonic missile technology, which has ignited a global arms race among the major powers like US, China, and Russia, which are vying for dominance in this frontier. So my presentation will delve into the characteristics of hypersonic missiles, their development, and their implications for the region, with a particular focus on India and its impact on the region. So first of all, delving into the characteristics of hypersonics. So as everybody knows, they have tremendous speed. So a hypersonic missile has to have at least Mach 5 speed to be called a hypersonic, which means 5 times the speed of sound. And there is, so that becomes up to about 4,000 miles per hour. And there are missiles that can travel up to 27 Mach. Russia's Avangard has 27 Mach speed. And then again, they are maneuverable well. So hypersonic missiles are highly maneuverable and can have long ranges. And then another characteristic they have, because of their tremendous speed and maneuverability, they can penetrate most ballistic missile defense systems. So what makes them special and lethal is that not just their speed, but their ability to maneuver once they are launched. And then here so essentially there are 3 kinds of hypersonic missile. The ballistic missiles that US, Russia has possessed are also hypersonic speed. They have existed for decades. But these 2 newer type of hypersonic missiles are game changers. So I have this small video that I'm going to play. Hopefully it should play. Okay.
There are 3 basic types: guided ballistic missiles, boost glide missiles, and hypersonic cruise missiles. Guided ballistic missiles are like normal ballistic missiles, but the re-entry vehicle, which carries the warhead back into the atmosphere after the missile shoots up through it, has steering fins attached to guide it to the target. Boost glide weapons are propelled to great speeds by rockets, just like ballistic missiles. But rather than arcing high above the atmosphere as ballistic missiles do, gliders re-enter the atmosphere shortly after launch. They rely on aerodynamic lift to stay aloft, potentially for thousands of miles without the use of an engine. The basic idea is the same as a hang glider. Hypersonic cruise missiles are powered throughout their flight. To keep flying at such great speeds over long distances, they need special scramjet engines. The speed of the missiles itself forces air into the engine, where it combusts at supersonic speeds.
So this slide is basically just to give you an idea of how much countries are spending on this. So the estimate for 2023 was that there is 7.12 billion being spent on hypersonic missiles. And almost 35% of that is being spent in North America. So 1/3 of it, mostly US is spending on it. And then coming to hypersonic missiles by Russia, so it has the Avangard ICBM, which uses a hypersonic boost glide vehicle. It has a Mach 27 speed and 6,000 kilometer range, and it has already been deployed reportedly. And then they have the Kinzhal, which is air-launched guided cruise missile with a range of 15,000 kilometer and Mach 10 speed. And it is nuclear and conventional warhead capable. And then there's Sircon, which is ship-launched hypersonic cruise missile. which is capable of targeting on ground and at sea with Mach 6 to 8. Then China has a few missiles, DF, ZF, hypersonic glide vehicle with a Mach 10 speed and range of 1200 kilometer. And then CHAS X-13, which 10 Mach speed and 1500 kilometer range. And then the Starry Sky 2, which it tested in August 2018. And it is already operational. It will be operational by 2025, in a year. And it is expected to develop longer range hypersonic capabilities such as DF-31 with 8,000 kilometer range. So what China is saying is that its hypersonic missile drive is fueled by fear of US hypersonic missiles that can potentially conduct a first strike while US missile defenses would defeat a retaliatory strike by China. So this is China's motivation for developing these weapons. Then there are, US is also developing a number of hypersonic missiles. But what is distinct about US hypersonic missiles is that they are actually meant for conventional use, which essentially means that they are looking for more precision in their missiles. So the US Navy has a number of hypersonic, the Army and the Air Force. And US basically claims that these weapons are aimed at neutralizing Russian and Chinese significant hypersonic missile developments. And then these are a number of countries that are also working on developing hypersonic missiles. And this is just a map to give you an idea of how many countries are already, the red is countries that are developing, and the blue is the ones that are still researching on it. Now coming to India, India has already joined the race to develop hypersonic missiles, and it tested the high-speed technology demonstrator vehicle first in June, then in September 2020, and the last test was in January 2023. It is powered by a scramjet engine with an altitude of 30 kilometers and a speed of Mach 6. And India has already spent about 30 million on the development of hypersonics, and it may be about 4 to 5 years away from developing and deploying these missiles. Then another one India has is the BrahMos 2, which is developing in collaboration with Russia. It's expected to have a Mach 6 speed, 290 kilometer range, and 300 kg warhead. And it uses a hypersonic scramjet technology. And Russia and India are both contributing towards funding this research and development. And it is thought to be based on Russia's Zircon hypersonic missile. And their expected development date of this missile is about 2028. It was expected to be developed earlier, but they have faced some delays in this regard. So coming to global security implications, they are a double-edged sword. I'll explain in a minute why I say that. So hypersonic missiles will affect strategic calculations among the great powers like US, Russia, China, and undermine nuclear deterrence. Hypersonic missiles can penetrate missile defense systems, that's why. They are destabilizing in one way, and then China and Russia already made it apparent that hypersonic missile development is a hedge against US missile defenses, while hypersonic missiles are essentially escalatory and increase chances of a strategic conflict. Another element associated with them is that they encourage first strikes temptations. It can, if you cannot defend against a hypersonic attack, so there is the temptation to go first in a crisis. So they are essentially escalatory. Now this diagram basically explains why it is effective against a BMD system. Because BMD system uses radars that if our conventional ballistic missiles travel in a arch parabolic trajectory. So it is very, the radars can detect the missile launch very early on. While you can see with hypersonic missiles, the radar detection happens very late in the trajectory, just minutes before it hits the target. So that is why it is effective against ballistic missile defense systems. Then more global security implications are that it would fuel an arms race, leading great powers to go for development of hypersonic anti-missile systems and other technologies to defeat enemy missiles. They are destabilizing since deployment of conventional hypersonic missiles may lead to failure of the adversary to distinguish between a conventional or a nuclear warhead. Then hypersonic missiles will likely drive changes to deterrence postures of great powers as well. This could lower the threshold for nuclear use and may increase the possibility of accidental launch. However, hypersonic missiles are also stabilizing in a way for nuclear deterrence for Russia and China, since it helps penetrate the US missile defense system and restores the concept of mutual vulnerability, which is at the core of nuclear deterrence. So that is why hypersonic missiles' global implications are complex. Okay. Coming to regional security implications, I'll quickly run through some of these because we are quickly running out of time. Hypersonic missile could further change nuclear deterrence calculations between India and Pakistan. India, a country with which will have hypersonic missiles in a few years, would have an edge over Pakistan. It would increase the first strike tendencies in the possessor state, that is India, with the confidence that it can strike the adversary and absorb a counter-strike through missile defenses. And this is very much relevant in the case of India and Pakistan because India has BMD, India has hypersonic, and Pakistan does not have hypersonic or BMD. So it would further erode nuclear deterrence between the two countries and create first strike temptations. And then this is the OODA loop, which means that this is, most countries use this to observe a threat, to decide and act against it. So in a hypersonic missile launch, this OODA loop or this cycle would be very compressed. Decision makers have very little time to react. And then also coming to India and Pakistan equation, the short flight missile times in South Asia, which are already 5 to 10 minutes, would further be shortened. And it would only take a few minutes for India to initiate the first strike in the absence of a credible countermeasure. And as you can see here in this picture, taken from Dr. Adil's paper in 2021, that hypersonic cruise missiles, if it's launched from Delhi to Lahore, it will take less than 3 minutes to reach. Then the bigger picture, I think it's very important to look at hypersonic missile development in the context of what else India is developing. So India has a preemptive counterforce strategy against Pakistan increasingly, and it is pursuing BMD, and it is also expanding its space capabilities with nearly 24 dedicated military satellites. This capability ideally suited for a preemptive strike, launch against Pakistan to take out its major nuclear forces, and the remaining missiles in a counter-strike can be intercepted by Indian BMD. So India is developing an array of capabilities or a toolbox for preemptive counterforce strike should it choose to use it. So it essentially erodes nuclear deterrence and makes South Asia highly volatile nuclear theater. I'm nearly done. So these are a few of the options that Pakistan can exercise to counterbalance the instability. It can develop its own hypersonic missile, but the technology is expensive, and I don't think at the moment it's a viable option for Pakistan. Pakistan is already diversifying its delivery systems like cruise missiles and MIRV. which can easily penetrate a BMD system, and strategies like mobility, dispersion, and camouflage to increase the survivability of its nuclear force in case of a preemptive strike. And then Pakistan also, depending on how much money it can invest in it, should mature its second strike capability. Right now, Pakistan has a very basic rudimentary capability which it needs to develop. And I will stop here and would be happy to answer any question. Thank you so much.
Chale, great, Ms. Ghazala. You took 15 minutes. So request to other two speakers, kindly restrict your remarks by 10 minutes, क्योंकि बाकी उसके बाद lunch भी करना, ठीक है? अगर late करेंगे तो late हो जाएंगे. अच्छा, so those of you, the audience who are present here, जो attention नहीं दे रहे, तो we will have a quiz after this session, जिसमें question answer भी होंगे. One of the questions that मैं आपको leading के, what's the fundamental difference between ballistic missile and cruise missile, because दोनों hypersonic speeds में होते हैं, especially once ballistic missile is in its re-entry phase. और जो across the border पीछे बैठे हुए तीन youngsters, you can come closer, join in this conversation. अच्छा, जो question answer session होगा, we will keep it bilingual. So don't worry about कि जी what you are speaking कि अंग्रेजी सही होती है नहीं होती है. This event, whole conference is all about clearing these concepts about emerging and disruptive technologies. So feel free to ask any question. All questions are relevant. So start thinking about these for question answer session. We want to have this vibrant debate discussion. Ali number one, Ali Ahmed. Yeah. कोशिश करो 10 minutes.
Sure, sir. So, thank you. The topic of my research is drone warfare and threshold of use of force. So here's the sequence of my presentation. I'll be talking about role of drones in contemporary warfare. Then I'll move to the core arguments that I'll be presenting. And finally, to support my arguments, I'll be putting forward some case studies. So if we talk about role of drones in contemporary warfare, the proliferation of drone technology has revolutionized the way states and even non-state actors engage in conflicts. So the use of common uses of drone technology are targeted strikes, surveillance, and kamikaze-style attacks. There are prominent examples all around the world for these uses. So if we talk about the conflicts that saw extensive usage of drone, then there comes role of drone in second Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. So Azerbaijan's utilization of drones proved to be instrumental in countering Armenian ground forces, although this usage was one-sided, but it still had an impact on the outcome of war. So the war ended with Armenia accepting a ceasefire agreement under severe terms, influenced by heavy losses due to Azerbaijani drones. So the deployment of kamikaze style, or we can call it suicide drones in recent conflicts, like one I have told you, and the other one, ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. It has also been witnessed that suicide drones have been used and are being used in this ongoing conflict extensively. So in contemporary times, drones provide aerial documentation of conflict zone. This is the role that is not really explored yet. So drones today provide aerial documentation of conflict zones, and drone footage then becomes a vital tool in propaganda efforts, influencing public perception and contributing to the broader information warfare. As during the initial days of Russia-Ukraine conflict, there was a footage of drone where Ukrainian drone hit Russian tank, and that footage was circulated worldwide. So this is an example of this role that drones play. Moving towards my core arguments, cost considerations. So the relatively low cost of building and maintaining drones, coupled with the absence of on-board pilots, present a significant advantage when employing force. So drones, as compared to the traditional manned aircrafts, are generally cheaper to manufacture and maintain. The reason being is that drones are smaller in size, they are simpler in design, and the absence of life support systems required for human pilots. So there is another reason. The other reason is that the components of drones are mass produced for various commercial as well as consumer applications. So this economy of scale also contributes to its low cost. Here's the comparison of top of the line drone and top of the line aircraft. So I couldn't find two of the figures for the Reaper drone, but still it will give you an idea that what is the cost difference for these. So the purchasing cost of Reaper drone is around 32 million per unit, and for F-35 Lightning II, it's 109 million per unit. So per operational cost per hour is also significantly, there's a difference between both. It's $32.50 per hour for drone, and for F-35 Lightning II, it's around $44,000. So moving forward, there are a few arguments that would contribute to the results I want to portray. So first one is risk compensation. The concept of risk compensation suggests that when there is a constant level of acceptable risk, decreasing the risk associated with certain action can increase its acceptance. So to put simply, if something becomes safer to do, people may do it more frequently. This is the core of risk compensations. So now drones, in context of drones eliminate the direct human costs of conflict for the party using them. This technological advancement leads to an increased risk-taking by those protected from the immediate consequences. Hence, employing force becomes easy, or what we can call it, it lowers the threshold for use of force. So the remote nature of engagement can encourage decision makers to authorize actions that are risky because they are protected from it. Second one is body bag effect. The fear of sustaining casualties often influences public opinion and political decisions, potentially leading to a caution in engaging or employing force. Drone technology, with its capability of operating without a human pilot on board, significantly reduces the risk of casualties among militaries. This aspect aligns with public's growing aversion to casualties in wars, as described by the body bag effect, leading to willingness regarding the use of force. This Vietnam War is best example of this. So precision and long endurance, I'll combine both of these headings. One of the key arguments in favor of drone use is their capability to precisely engage targets. The reason being is that drones have long endurance and they can hover over the target for hours and hours. It's around I think 30 hours for a single flight. So this aspect of drone ability to loiter enhances the precision of military operations that incentivizes the use of force. Now, when it comes to acceptance of drones, so when countries targeted by drone strikes might perceive these attacks differently than they would for a manned aircraft incursion. Why? Because it's less form of direct attack. Why? Because there's no human pilot in drone. So the use of force using drones often receive less media coverage compared to ground operations or manned aircraft attacks. I'll prove it when I'll come to case studies. Drones usage has a certain degree of normalization in public consciousness due to the increased use of drones in contemporary times. So you might also have an acceptance for a drone. Why? Because it has roles in civil side as well as military side. So there's a degree of normalization for public. it seems more routine and less shocking. So operational advantages over manned aircrafts, drones can be deployed more rapidly and with greater ease. Also, operating drones generally require less extensive training compared to flying conventional aircraft. So this is a big advantage for drones. They have forward basing. They don't need paved runways for landing or takeoff. So this is an very interesting arguments that you also might have been finding it interesting. So the debate until now suggests that drone technology has reduced the threshold for use of force in contemporary times. So now coming towards the case studies, I'll be presenting the case studies that would support my arguments that I have previously presented. So in January 2023, Israel conducted a drone strike in Iran that targeted a military factory near Isfahan. This is one instance that shows how drone technology has lowered the threshold for military engagements, allowing states to conduct precise operations with reduced risk. If it was a manned aircraft, firstly, Israel might not have considered going for this strike. So by opting for a drone strike, Israel demonstrated the ability to target key facilities in Iran while minimizing the potential for direct confrontation and the risk typically associated with traditional military actions. So second is Russia in April 2008 downed a Georgian drone. Eventually they fought a war in August 28, but if it was a manned aircraft that was downed by Russia, that war might have been started in that same month. So Israel's downing of an Iranian armed drone in Feb 2018 further demonstrates a lowered threshold for engaging in proactive acts. Downing of US Global Hawk by Iranian forces in June 2019 is another example. In this case, drones perceived as less proactive option compared to manned aircraft facilitated a response that might have otherwise been deemed too escalatory or risky. So so I was talking about the peace times. Now if we go for wartime situation or conflict zones, the usage of drone in conflicts like Russia and Ukraine are also extensive. Both sides are prioritizing the use of drones to strike each other facilities, opting not to deploy their substantial fleets of manned aircraft. This choice stems from the significant risks posed by both states' surface-to-air missiles, which endanger pilots supporting ground operations. Both of these states have engaged in less costly form of war. So, to conclude my presentation, in all these instances, escalation dynamics might have been more likely to spiral into an armed conflict if manned aircraft would have been used instead of drones. So, these incidents reinforce that drone technology has lowered the threshold for use of force. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you, Ali Abbas. The debate is ongoing debate is whether manned aircraft will become obsolete or not. I'm happy that Ali Abbas he made an argument the merits of having drone. अगर ये पहले आ जाते मैं और बनूरी साहब शायद एयरफोर्स में ना होते हम obsolete हो चुके होते ठीक है but this is an interesting argument कि ये जो cost benefit इसके उस पे करते हैं we will get into this debate start thinking about the application of this क्योंकि combat collaborative combat aircraft ये जो unmanned जो clone कह लें कि जी fighter aircraft के F-16 जा रहा है उसके साथ दूसरा जो F-16 unmanned with more payload lesser avionics controlled by the जो primary aircraft ये सारे concepts evolve हो रहे हैं so start thinking about it and we will have more discussion और Ali से पूछेंगे during question and answer session. Now Ali number 2, Ali Abbas from Quetta, he is from BTTN. Welcome.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. And it's wonderful to see seasoned professionals and youngsters together in today's gathering. I will have the privilege to present my paper titled Hypersonic Weapons and the Future of Strategic Stability Between the Nuclear Rivals. The sequence of my presentation is as follows, as flashed. Right, so hypersonic weapons are characterized by high speeds and unprecedented maneuverability. They can maneuver kilometers, even miles, when they are mid-flight. They can maintain evasiveness and target ambiguity since they maneuver the terminal defense or the ground, the mid-course defense might not be able to calculate where exactly this hypersonic weapon is heading, as contrasted by ballistic missiles, which falls in a parabolic shape. You can know where it is going to land. It is a novel weapon. That means that we should deeply analyze this weapon and know about its implications and consequences on strategic stability. Also, we'll be talking about the costs and the perceived benefits of these weapons and the technological challenges, because these are new technologies. New countries are coming into this domain. So it's not a mature technology. So we'll be talking about the challenges as well. Also, the hype that is attached with the hypersonic weapons, is it justified or is it just a hype that people like to talk on? Theoretical framework. Now, our paper is based on the security dilemma theoretical framework. Its three precepts, that is threat perception, arms race, and crisis instability. Now, a country develops a hypersonic weapon. The other state takes it as a threat. Now, as a response, it is going to engage in an arms race to equalize that strategic effect. And when the arms race goes out of hand, when the differences become so large, it causes crisis instability and might cause first strike temptations, especially in case of India and Pakistan, which we'll be talking about later in this presentation. In the objectives, we would like to explore hypersonic technology, its perceived benefits and limitations again. Hypersonic weapons, how will they alter strategic stability between the global powers as well as the nuclear rivals, the neighbors in South Asia? And also, again, the difference between the global powers and South Asia, there will be a difference between the analysis and the outcomes and the repercussions. We will be talking about that in detail. Hypersonic weapons are attained because they perceivably, they give you a strategic edge. They give you the ability to strike the enemy with surety. The United States withdrew from the ABM treaty back in 2002, which caused fears in Russia and it started anticipating future BMD systems so advanced that the United States might be able to get away with the first strike. The United States also started its conventional global prompt strike program, and they intended to strike targets all over the globe within an hour. China fears a decapitating strike. As discussed in my paper, it has a fairly smaller nuclear arsenal, which is more susceptible to a first strike, a decapitating strike. So in order to offset that, it is developing hypersonic glide vehicles and hypersonic cruise missiles. Also, anti-access area denial, A2AD, is a very important concept in hypersonic realm, because this gives you superior firepower to reduce the enemy's mobility. Firepower and mobility, that's what we talk about in war. Excuse me. And also precision targeting of critical and moving infrastructure. That is also something that hypersonic weapons will come into play in. Technological challenges, something that is very much overlooked, especially for hypersonic optimists. These weapons, they are new. They can fly at speeds at least Mach 5. So they can go for Mach 10, Mach 15, Mach 20. But the difference between them and ballistic missile is that the ballistic missile goes through a parabola and it reaches 600 kilometers, 500 kilometers. It exits the atmosphere. The HGV or HCM, it remains within the atmosphere. The HGV, it exits, but it re-enters. So the atmosphere has a lot of drag, and also there's a lot of kinetic energy, and the hypersonic flow concept where the temperature exceeds 1600 Celsius. The carbon-carbon composite that is mainly used in hypersonic glide vehicles and cruise missiles is extremely challenging to produce. The United States, China, and Russia, they currently are the advanced countries. The USA, surprisingly, does not have a deployable operational cruise missile or HGV, and that explains why it's so hard to make a hypersonic weapon. Also, the cutting-edge computer systems, the navigation systems, the guidance systems, these are not simple, as simple as a ballistic missile might be, because they need to maneuver, they need to lock their targets as well, not lose their target while they're maneuvering. So that also requires a strong technological, scientific prowess, which a lot of countries do not have yet. Now, we in the paper, we talk about the drag and loss of kinetic energy. In this slide, you can see that hypersonic weapons are both costly and they are susceptible to drag and loss of kinetic energy. The drag increases with the square of the velocity. The loss of kinetic energy increases with the cube of the velocity. So the longer the hypersonic weapon flies, the slower it will get as compared to a ballistic missile. And here you can see that the United States might spend $41 million for an intermediate range hypersonic boost glide missile, whereas for maneuverable re-entry vehicle, which my colleague alluded to as advanced ballistic missile, it will cost around $26 million. The lift and drag also, again, we will discuss in the upcoming slide why hypersonic weapons might be even slower than ballistic missiles, as proved by graphs. Now, the disruptive capacity and the future of strategic stability is that we think that hypersonic weapons will not alter the thought on strategic stability in the near future, especially in long-range strikes. Because ballistic missiles are currently suited much better to strike targets longer than 2,000 miles, 3,000 miles, and up to 10,000 miles. In the near term, hypersonic weapons will function better in tactical level, theater level, and operational level, ranges below 2,000 kilometers. And as said in the paper, the current ballistic missiles can bypass existing missile defense. The United States has the most sophisticated interceptor system with 44 interceptors throughout the world. The DoD conducted a test checking 2 salvos of North Korean ballistic missiles, and supposedly they failed to intercept it. So 2 ICBMs could not be intercepted by the most advanced interceptor system in the world. Now, the US interceptor system has a strike rate of 45%. That is not good for, it's not a good statistic for when it comes to nuclear weapons and hypersonic missiles. All nuclear states right now are vulnerable to ballistic missile attacks. The hypersonic weapons as such have not brought any significant alteration into the thinking of nuclear strategists because they are already vulnerable. Countries cannot already defend against existing ballistic missiles, let alone hypersonic weapons. This is the graph that I wanted to talk about. Hypersonic weapons are not so fast. The black line in the middle you see is the ballistic missile on a minimum energy trajectory. The orange one is a suppressed trajectory, and this maroon line is hypersonic glide vehicle. As it crosses 5,000 kilometers, the range, you can see that an HGV will take 5 to 20 minutes longer than a conventional ballistic missile to reach its target. So for longer ranges, again, the concept of drag, loss of kinetic energy, the HGV or HCM slowing down is all factors that we have to bring into consideration. Now, there's also a twist in the paper where we talk about tactical superiority and dominance. As I said, for long ranges, they might not be as effective. But for shorter ranges, below 2,000 kilometers, they are well suited to engage targets. They give immense firepower, and with the maneuverability, they can confuse existing defense systems, the naval-based defense systems like the Aegis BMD of the United States, which is stationed in the Asia Pacific and all over the world. The shorter distance will also help mitigate the physics-related challenges. As it goes longer, it gets even hotter and it gets even slower. But for tactical levels, that will not affect it as much, we believe. Hypersonic weapons for Russia and China will serve well as A2AD weapons in A2AD missions. Final portion of my presentation talks about hypersonic weapons and strategic stability in South Asia. As we talked about tactical level, India and Pakistan's, the ranges of their centers, city centers or military centers is below 1,000 kilometers. So that comes into that system. Now what India is doing is it's developing its BMD. It has already acquired the S-400 and now it is working on BrahMos 2. Now the difference between BrahMos 2 and BrahMos 1 is that one, the range, and two, the speed and the maneuverability. BrahMos has a range of 290 kilometers, BrahMos 2 has a purported range of more than 1,000 miles. So with the BrahMos that was launched back in 2022, it can't strike each and every critical target here in Pakistan, what we call counter force targets. But with the BrahMos 2, it can not only target Pakistanis, the counter force targets, but even in China as well, in some parts of China. So it will change the dynamics here in South Asia. And again, with the preemptive temptations that India has, and with the S-400 system, Pakistan, again, coming back to the security dilemma, might feel a threat, and then it might go for an arms race, and then again, we might be able to control the crisis and stability, but again, those things are here. Pakistan will seek collaboration with China. That is what we believe, as has been the case with the past. This map that I want to show you, on the left corner, we have this second line, which is 300 kilometers. This is the purported range of the BrahMos. And as I discussed in the paper, Balochistan, KP, they might be safe from BrahMos. But coming to the center, where we have this first line with the 1,000 kilometers radius, this will be the purported range of the BrahMos 2. It will cover Afghanistan, it will cover half of India, half of Iran, and also some parts of China. So there will be some, not some, but significant changes here in South Asia if they become successful with fielding the hypersonic weapon that is BrahMos 2. In conclusion, I would like to say that hypersonic weapons are novel and they need time to mature. It's very early to say whether they will have long-lasting effects or otherwise. Hypersonic weapons will help in defeating existing systems. This is what a lot of people believe. However, we say that this understanding might be too optimistic. Hypersonic weapons are technically challenging and they incur heavy financial burdens on the countries as displayed here. Ballistic missiles will remain the weapons of choice for long-range strikes. Modern hypersonic weapons will not alter the strategic stability on global level. Okay? This is of emphasis, global level. But in South Asia, due to the contiguity and the proximity, it will have a major impact on Pakistan's security and on Chinese sea lines of communications as well, as it uses the Indian Ocean. This may result in an arms race where Pakistan could acquire its own hypersonic glide vehicle or a hypersonic cruise missile, potentially with China's help. That is it. Thank you so much.
Now another emerging scholar. So, let me admit that I don't know much about emerging technologies and disruptive technologies because these technologies are still emerging, evolving. So there's a very strong debate going on in the Western circle, the technologically advanced countries. They are also contemplating these technologies. Many of these technologies have yet to mature, but there's very vibrant debate, and that is why it is important for us to understand the implications of these technologies as and when these technologies are introduced into our region, into particular conflict. I'll try to limit my remarks to 10 minutes. I had been harsh with my panelists, so you can take revenge. Agar main 10 minutes se upar ho gaya, to you can stop me, theek hai? Achha. These are some of the technologies, not all, and though that are known as, some are arguably, questionably, you can categorize as emerging technologies, because some of these technologies have been experimented in 50s or 60s. So what we are seeing nowadays is the improved version of those technologies. So you can questionably say whether these are emerging or not. So artificial intelligence, quantum computing, space technology, cyber, bio-nanotechnologies, composite materials, something that Ali Abbas also mentioned, these materials are being used in hypersonic weapons. Hypersonic missiles, again, it's not a new technology, but since the developments are happening and militaries are integrating these systems into their military postures, so you need to understand the implications of these. Drones, again, these were first experimented in 50s or 60s. So this is not a new novel technology. So this was there in some form in World War II as well. Then the anti-satellite. I'll not go about each one of these technologies. We have limited time. But what I'm going to do is something that has not been covered by my panelists, the colleagues over here, sitting young colleagues. AI, space, and quantum. So these are three areas because there is cyber, another session, and quantum, I assume that's more, that will be covered in the second panel. Okay. Artificial intelligence, as we see, it intersects all domains of warfare and also in commercial ventures as well. So land, air, or sea-based technology. So artificial intelligence is being used in all these technologies, weapon systems. So what are the problems with it? If it is integrated into nuclear command and control, it can enable, or it can help quick analysis. So it can be advantageous. But if you give authority to algorithms to launch nuclear weapons, you integrate AI into nuclear command and control in a way that you are giving that authority to those algorithms to launch nuclear weapons, then it becomes destabilizing. The characteristic of artificial intelligence, it is evolving at a very fast pace. Once we are trying to understand and we are trying to integrate it in military application, there is always another version of artificial intelligence, so there is an ongoing race. So this becomes very difficult. It has an autonomous character, so it has the ability to shape its own direction. So what we are looking at, generative AI in the future, so that will be more problematic. Another problem is that there is increasing role of non-state entities, private entities into AI. Most of the research in the West is going in the commercial side. And that is why the race is very fast-paced, because commercial entities, they are working on this for their commercial dividends. So they're competing with each other, and that makes it very difficult to compete with those, because we do not have that ecosystem in Pakistan. And that's why these technologically advanced countries, they are going at a very faster pace, and it becomes very difficult for countries like Pakistan to follow that. Second is the quantum and how it is going to impact the future of warfare. It will still take few years to mature. It has not matured, but it has a very vast potential in terms of communication, sensors, navigation. It can revolutionize everything. It is going to make GPS-based navigation system obsolete. Imagine the air forces, they heavily rely on GPS systems, and once there is a navigation system based on quantum, which doesn't take data from the satellites, how secure that could be, or how destabilizing could be for the other parties. So that's one use of that. Another use is about the sensors. There's an argument that in future, the oceans are going to be transparent. The radars are going to be so strong that they would be able to penetrate deep into oceans. So if that kind of technology is being evolved, so there is a question mark that whether the states which are aspiring to acquire second strike capability, should they invest tens and hundreds of billions of dollars in a technology that might become obsolete or redundant, because the basic premise about having a short second strike capability is that it is very difficult to detect nuclear powered submarines under the sea. But if you have radars that you can detect, so should you be investing in second strike capability, building nuclear submarines, or should you go for investing in quantum technologies? So that's another argument. Computing would become very powerful. Brigadier Naeem Salik also briefly mentioned in his remarks. So the state which will have this advantage of quantum computing, they will be able to secure their cyber networks and have the ability to intercept or intervene in other networks. So that's the kind of potential the quantum would have. Space, which is a neglected area in Pakistan, so we need to see, because everything is linked with space these days. The military, land forces, sea or air, you cannot operate without space. So if a state has dominance in space, with the space-based assets, it will have that superiority over its adversary. AI, space intersects all domains. It is relevant for sea operations, it is relevant for land-based operation and for the Air Force. I hope that some of you would have heard about this Mackinder theory, that whosoever will control Eurasia would control the world. So somebody coined this is not my phrase, whosoever will control low Earth orbits in the future will rule the world. And there is another problem, that so many commercial entities, they are also launching these satellites into low Earth orbit. It is going to saturate at one point. So countries which are lagging, like Pakistan, you may not be able to place your satellite in that slot because it would be saturated, or it will be dominated by other commercial entities or other states. On space, you may have heard this about moon rush. There is ongoing race by major powers as well as some commercial entities like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos of Amazon. There are many studies that there are tremendous resources on the moon, and these states and non-state entities, that is why they are aspiring to make their bases on moon. So if they in future are able to establish their bases, there would be interest to protect those bases because there are these resources available on this moon. So this could lead to military establishment of military bases on moon in the future. So we are talking about future. There are certain companies like Toyota, they have already invested hundreds and millions of dollars in creating those buggies that will enable human beings to live on moon for a couple of weeks at least. So as technology grows and this competition grows, there could be a possibility of militarization of these planetary or the moon and other planets. Another concept that we introduced in our recently concluded workshop was deterrence in space. Because if you have assets in space and you want to dominate other countries or your rivals, you would develop your capabilities that could deter your adversaries not to mingle or intervene with your assets, your satellite network. So that's the concept that is evolving. It is similar to something like nuclear deterrence, like deterrence by denial or deterrence by punishment. So these are the concepts that we also experimented or we discussed during our workshop, and we invited a scholar from UK to discuss this. This was very interesting, and I would urge you to think about these issues because we are mostly fixated on deterrence and in the nuclear domain. Now, the impact on warfare and strategy. Well, emerging and disruptive technologies bring revolution in military affairs. This RMA concept, we very conveniently integrate into our studies or thought process, but it has two components. One is invention. Invention could be anything, a new technology being invented, but unless that technology is incorporated into concepts, the innovation is not going to be there. Or the revolution or military affairs would only be if these technologies are incorporated into your operational concepts. So that becomes revolution in military affairs. So in Pakistan, are we thinking about these things? Are we integrating these technologies into our military concept? If not, I think the RMA that we are discussing is quite different from the RMA that is happening around the world. So how these technologies can impact the future of warfare and strategy? It can make geographical distances irrelevant and battlefields more transparent. You already know the drones being operated from United States into Afghanistan. So the commanders can sit anywhere. So if they have the complete picture through radars, through satellites, and they have these secure communication links, They don't need to be in the battlefield, so they can command the troops from far off distances. So the geographical distances are going to be irrelevant once these technologies or part of these technologies are integrated by major powers. The second, the intellectual mass. For now, up till now, we mostly focus on whoever will have more tanks, aircraft, artillery, probably that will give you an advantage. The future is not like this. It is more about intellectual mass. If you are able to bring those ideas, bring those people who are data scientists, computer engineers, software engineers, and you can collect that mass together and apply that, you will have advantage. So the mass, the material mass won't matter much. It would be more about intellectual mass, how you incorporate that into your operational concepts. The third is organizational cultures. We know the fighting forces, they always take lead in command. But if the future battlefield is going to be entirely different, so you would need to give precedence or importance to these data scientists, quantum engineers, software engineers in your decision making. And that is critical because they are going to be your fighting troops. Or your future warriors need to be aware of these technologies that are coming in the future or how these are being integrated. So these were some of the some bullet points, and I'm sure that we can discuss more during question and answer session if the time permits. The implications for Pakistan. Our existing military posture is more fixated about, yes, they should have stopped me. There's a more fixated about conventional nuclear deterrence, okay? लेकिन जो future conflict है between India and Pakistan, most likely the way we see, and General Sarfraz was also talking about, we need to see, contextualize our environment with respect to India. India is far ahead. It has taken a lead. Yes, for a number of reasons के उनका जो ecosystem है, they have developed, उसमें commercial entities या commercial ventures को उन्होंने promote किया जिससे वो military dividends लेते रहे. And of course, United States and other technologically advanced countries, they are helping India. India-US collaboration, General Sarfraz also mentioned. But important जो उसका एक जो evolve हो रहा है, the kind of strategic partnership, it's more technology intensive, like this initiative for creative and emerging technologies. This talks about transfer of technologies, quantum में, cyber में, AI के अंदर. So India is benefiting from all those. Four basic foundational agreements की बात की थी, General Sarfraz ने भी जो BICA, Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement. So all those agreements allow United States resources to be used by India. So that gives India an advantage. Hypersonic asset weapons पे सारी बात कर ली. So the point is, the implication for Pakistan are serious, but how to go about it? We need to prioritize national resources and invest in critical and emerging technologies for commercial as well as military application. It is not necessary that you develop all these technologies. Depending upon your resources, your capacity, you can identify what are critical technologies for now, and you can invest your human resource and money on these technologies so that you start competing with your adversaries. We need to build public-private partnership. Military run ventures are not going to succeed because there is a peculiar culture. These technologies have prospered or advanced in the West because commercial entities were ahead. So we need to work on this. We need to bring organizational changes in military where data scientists, AI and software, I've already talked about it. We need to develop new concepts of war fighting, keeping into consideration that India would have some of these technologies in a future conflict. ये एक मुल्तान मूवमेंट वाला फ्रेज था. माय कोलीग हशाम, फर्स्ट सेक्रेटरी, फ्रेंड हशाम जो फॉरेन ऑफिस में है जिनेवा में, ही सेड इट्स अ मुल्तान मीटिंग. मुल्तान का आई एम श्योर कि आपको पता होगा जो कि न्यूक्लियर का डिसीजन जहाँ पे हुआ था कि वी नीड टू बिल्ड वेपन्स एट ऑल कॉस्ट. So he said it's a Multan moment, and it should be a Multan moment, not the Hiroshima moment कि जब ये technologies आपके ऊपर use हो जाए, and then you wake up that we need to do something about it. Thank you. जी, please. I'll just request के briefly अपना introduce कर ले और questions जितने brief रख सके ताकि हम ज़्यादा questions ले सकें.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Kanak Ghalib. My question is directed to Ms. Ghazala. Your last recommendation was pertaining to the improvement and development of the second strike capability. In the context of remarks highlighted by Dr. Adil Sultan regarding the emerging disruptive technologies of making the seas transparent, would you like to amend your recommendation, or you still would consider some other things? Thank you.
I think we can take 2-3 questions ताकि फिर वो ज़्यादा को opportunity मिले, and then I'll request my panelists के जवाब दे. जी, please.
This is Jawad Alisha. I'm from CI Karachi. My question is from Ms. Ghazala. A short question. Are there any developments, technological developments to counter or to defeat hypersonics? Thank you.
Can you bring mic over here, जी?
Sir, thank you so much. My name is Zohaib Iltaf, and I'm from CIS AJK. And my question is that you talked about it that we need to focus on strategic technologies. But what I have observed that we wrote an article about triad of technologies. So these technologies are work in an ecosystem. So even if you do not develop one technology, so you cannot even properly get benefit from other technology as well. For example, if you this technology, but if you are not developing AI, so you won't be able to decipher patterns, won't be able a better situation analysis. So I think that what are your thoughts that we need to see these technologies in integration as compared to seeing this technology alone?
Okay, great. So, Ms. Ghazala, first question जो Colonel Ghalib का था.
जी, briefly I will just try to answer that. I still would suggest that Pakistan does need to build up its second strike capability because these emerging technologies are still emerging, and they will have an impact on all aspects of warfare and strategic stability, but they're not mutually exclusive. Like, you cannot focus on emerging technologies and not build up your second strike capability. I know it's progress. Pakistan does not have enough means to develop a sophisticated second strike capability, but I would still argue that we need to work on it. We may have a rudimentary one right now based on diesel submarines, Augusta 90s, but we need to work on it. And also anti-hypersonic technologies. The leaders in hypersonic missile race are already investing in it. So especially the US has already a budget request in its last year's fiscal year for developing anti-hypersonic technology. So there's a lot of work going on in that. So I think in the end, it's just like nuclear weapons. So one country develop it, the other one develop it, then you develop BMD systems, then you develop anti-BMD systems. So this hypersonic race is the same. So it's the race for the offensive system and then defensive systems. I think this is the trajectory the hypersonic weapons will also take.
चले, great. Just a brief उसके counter में you need not to have a technology. It can always be a concept as well. ठीक है? और ये जो question था Zohaib का about if we keep hyphenating के unless we build cyber, AI, space उसको होगा तो you will never start. You as a state, as a decision makers, they have to identify कि आपके critical इस वक्त ज़रूरत क्या है. वो टेक्नोलॉजी आपके पास बेस है ही नहीं है, आप उस पर काम कर दें, बाकी चीज़ों पे होगा. लेकिन अगर आप इन सब को होलसम कहेंगे जी सब पे इकट्ठा ही काम होगा तो फिर कभी काम नहीं होगा उसका. दैट इज इट। लेकिन स्पेस को सेपरेट भी आप कर सकते हैं, क्योंकि स्पेस की अगर आप देखें एवोल्यूशन वो काफ़ी पहले से एआई वगैरह का अभी आया है। जो ऑटोनमस की हम बात कर रहे हैं, एआई इज बीइंग यूज्ड इन स्पेस, लेकिन उसका रोल इस तरह से नहीं है। जो सैटेलाइट्स वगैरह जो आप ऑपरेट कर रहे हैं या जो एंटी सैटेलाइट वेपन्स बन रहे हैं, उनके अंदर एआई का रोल उस तरह से अभी तक नहीं है। फ्यूचर में यस, वी कैन continue with this discussion if we have time, so I'll give you an opportunity to counter my argument. जी, और कोई बाकी सब समझ आ गया? जी।
Assalamualaikum. My name is Mashul Shahnawaz and I'm a student of Strategic and Nuclear Studies at NTU. I have a Dr. Ahmed Ali. When highlighting the positive...
एक मिनट जरा जोर से माइक में बोलिएगा।
Am I audible?
जी जी जरा।
So, about the positive impacts of drone, talked about how it will be minimized back. On the other hand, we see that in recent times there is increasing talk of AI-powered fully autonomous drones, and the Pentagon is those. So, do you not think that AI-powered fully autonomous drones will be undermining the principles of distinction and proportionality and increasing the civilian losses instead? So that is my question. Thank you.
Great question. चलो। Any other question? जी, यहाँ पे डॉक्टर नासिर हफीज के पास लेके आए, फिर आपके पास लेके आते हैं।
हेलो सर, मेरा जो सवाल है वो बड़ा फंडामेंटल है, एंड इट इज़ इन कंटिन्यूएशन टू व्हाट वाज अर्लियर आस्क्ड। तो टेक्नोलॉजी की जब हम बात करते हैं, इन्होंने इकोसिस्टम की बात की सर, तो मैं सर इस इकोसिस्टम की बात उस तरह दोबारा से हाईलाइट करना चाह रहा हूँ, आपसे पूछना चाह रहा हूँ कि अगर आपके मुल्क में एजुकेशन सिस्टम ही नहीं है, इसके अंदर आपके पास सफिशिएंट मैन पावर ही नहीं है जो एल्गोरिथम लिख सके, अगर आपने कॉपी पेस्ट करके एआई के लिए एल्गोरिथम बाहर से ही लेने हैं, तो क्या टेक्नोलॉजी हम अगर जितनी मर्जी ले आएँ, पूरा एजुकेशन सिस्टम गेयर अप ही नहीं है टेक्नोलॉजी को R&D को डेवलप करने के लिए। तो कुछ देर के लिए एक रेस्पाइट तो आ सकती है कुछ टेक्नोलॉजी को इंपोर्ट करके, लेकिन R&D अगर नहीं होगी तो आप हमेशा उस रेस में लैग करेंगे। आप हमेशा एक ऐसे उस ट्रक की बत्ती के पीछे हम चलते रहेंगे, वो एक नई डेवलपमेंट आएगी, हम उसके पीछे दौड़ पड़ेंगे। तो क्या हमें एक इकोसिस्टम जो कि बेस्ड ऑन रिसर्च एंड डेवलपमेंट की और एजुकेशन को
शुक्रिया, थैंक यू। जो उधर लेडी ऑन दिस राइट साइड टेबल पे जो है, नहीं इनको दे दें जी।
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Shanur Iqbal. I'm a student from Zavist. I'm currently getting my bachelor's in international relations. So my question is basically Dr. Adil Sultan. You talked about the space race and with states and even commercial entities vying for its control. Do you think that there is any chance that space can be dealt with as an asset or a shared asset of humanity, or in a relatively similar manner as was done with the entire, or an agreement coming about to the way it is used to create certain morals and norms, and to probably stop that concentration that you were talking about?
Great, thank you.
Thank you, sir. I am Siddha Rahman. I am Siddha Rahman. मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है अली अब्बास से। अली अब्बास ने बेसिकली ये कहा है कि जो BMD सिस्टम है इस वक्त ज़्यादा इफेक्टिव नहीं है, लेकिन हम इफ़ वी सी द करंट कॉन्फ्लिक्ट in Gaza, that Israel has heavily relied on its Iron Dome system. How do you see that reliance, that it has effectively neutralized many of the Houthi strikes on Israel, and it is heavily relying on its Iron Dome system? And currently we see that in 2023, in October 2023, Israel ने जो है वो 100 किलोमीटर से ऊपर के ऑल्टीट्यूड के ऊपर जो है वो हौसी मिसाइल्स की स्ट्राइक्स को जो है वो हिट किया है या इंटरसेप्ट किया है। तो किस तरह से आप इसको लेते हैं कि इन फ्यूचर कैन दे बी रिलायबल फॉर मैनी अदर नेशंस? BMD सिस्टम रिलायबल हो सकता है दूसरी नेशंस के लिए भी if they do further work on that? So your take on that? Thank you.
You have 2 fingers? अच्छा, so फिर इसके बाद आएंगे. Okay, I'll appreciate अगर questions आप panelists को करें जिन्होंने मेहनत की ये papers लिखे. हाँ, मैं तो बोलता रहता हूँ और आखिर में conclusion में कर दूँगा. लेकिन I'll be happy to answer any question that I know. ठीक है? So drones वाला question.
So thank you for this very pertinent question. So you have rightly pointed out कि ethical issues इससे, for example, जैसे आपने बात की AI powered drones will increase casualties. But जो कि मेरा core argument था ना, वो this was regarding the drones that are used against the countries. The casualties will increase for the countries the drones are being used, but the country using it won't have that kind of effect with regards to casualties. Or there's then technology and advancement like spinning blades. US has used in Afghanistan RX-9, I guess it's named as. So it was used to eliminate Al-Zawari in Afghanistan. So with that advancement in technology, like you have told, human out of the loop, there are the, to tackle the ethical issues, side by side इस तरह की technologies भी आ रही हैं. और बिल्कुल आपने सही कहा कि internationally ethical debate इस पे चल रही है, international humanitarian law के aspect से इसको देखा जा रहा है. Although debate चल रही हैं, but it is not, I'm not sure if these would have any outcome in future. So thank you.
और दूसरा question BMD वाला भी आपसे ही था? Ali Abbas.
Thank you very much for the question. आपके question से पे आने से पहले, this fine gentleman here asked about the emerging BMD systems. There is one that the United States is working on, which is the hypersonic and ballistic space tracking space sensor, HBTSS. You can search on it, and it relies on the space sensors, not the ground and the naval and the terminal defenses, but also they are going to amalgamate this the space sensor as well to track live when the missile is launched. Future of BMD के बारे में आपने बात की, आपने आयरन डोम के बारे में बात की. देखें, there is a huge difference between advanced nations that own ICBMs like Russia, like China, like North Korea, and with Hamas or with Houthis. ठीक है? Hamas launches what? It launches rockets at most. ठीक है? उनके पास MRBM नहीं है, ICBM नहीं है, short range ballistic missiles even Hamas doesn't have. Hezbollah of Lebanon might have Scuds. Houthis might have been given these guided munitions and a bit longer range, not long range, but more than 1,000 kilometers. ठीक है? तो आपने हमास की इंटरसेप्शन के बारे में बात की, आयरन डोम की इंटरसेप्शन के बारे में बात की. रॉकेट्स, दे आर नॉट एज फास्ट एज ICBMs, दे आर नॉट एज डेडली. ठीक है? उनका टेक्नोलॉजी उतना एडवांस नहीं है, सो दे आर ईजियर टू इंटरसेप्ट एज कम्पेयर टू एन ICBM. दूसरी बात, अगर आप ईरान का अगर केस देख लें, ईरान ने जो रिटेलिएशन की है, उनके ड्रोन्स बेशक इंटरसेप्ट हुए हैं, उनके कुछ मिसाइल्स इंटरसेप्ट हुए हैं, बट सम ऑफ द मिसाइल्स डिड हिट, दे डिड क्रॉस द आयरन डोम. और ये भी हम नहीं कह सकते कि ईरान ने अपना पूरा एडवांस्ड आर्सनल भेज दिया है. ईरान माइट हैव सेंट सम मिसाइल्स दैट वर गोइंग टू बी ऑब्सोलीट. ठीक है? एंड इट वाज प्रोपोर्शनल अटैक. इफ ईरान वांटेड टू अटैक इजराइल with impunity or without keeping proportion in mind, I am sure that they would have evaded the Iron Dome, but they did not do it because it has strategic implications. Proportionality रखनी होती है आपने. So that's why आपका जो question है, this is difference between rockets and short range BMs and middle range BMs, intermediate range BMs and ICBMs. They are quite technologically sophisticated, the ICBMs, ठीक है, as compared to rockets. So I hope that answers your question.
चलो, great, thank you. जी, अभी जो डॉक्टर नासिर ने क्वेश्चन पूछा और मिस जो थी उसकी स्पेस का, मैं कंक्लूडिंग 1 मिनट में उनको आंसर कर दूंगा. लेट्स गिव अपॉर्चुनिटी. जो बाकी क्वेश्चन है वो 2 मेरे पास ऑनलाइन भी हैं. नहीं सर, डॉक्टर शबाना फयाज.
जी, अस्सलाम वालेकुम एवरीबॉडी. I have a brief question regarding the cost-benefit analysis of disruptive technologies, and I would like to ask about the non-kinetic impact of the disruptive technologies on the civilians and also like health and other systems. airline system? And secondly, I'm also keen to know about the Pakistan's option. Is there be some work or the prospects of Pakistan-China cooperation for the longer term collaboration in this field?
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. We have two questions because मुझे चिट दे दिए कि 5 मिनट हैं उसके बाद लंच नहीं मिलेगा तो ऑनलाइन पार्टिसिपेंट है उसामा निज़मानी again he asked question from me so उसामा sorry we can have discussion बाद में करेंगे ज़ुहैब somehow ये जो generation Z का abbreviated typo होता है ये मुझे समझ नहीं आया लेकिन जो समझ आया मैं वो बता दूं कि NT has to overcome the evolution of hypersonic missile can't we go defensive strategy अच्छा simple can we have defensive strategy जो ज़ुहैब ने पूछा है hypersonic missile के आपने already जवाब दे दिए whether you want to add something to it or not चलें briefly
Quite get what he wanted.
I couldn't also get तो मैं उससे assume कर रहा हूँ वो
In
कह
your
रहा है
own
कि
words,
जी
please, if you could.
I think he's saying hypersonic missiles can we have defensive strategy
We can have an offensive defense strategy, as I would like to term it, where, as I said, BMDs, they cannot defend against huge salvo of ICBMs, so let alone hypersonic missiles with the maneuverability and the evasiveness. So what we can do is that we're going to tell them, you make a hypersonic weapon, we're going to make our own hypersonic weapon. If you use it, we're going to use it on you. So you don't have any, I mean, we cannot make a BMD system as good as that would intercept an advanced ballistic missile or a hypersonic glide vehicle or a cruise missile. So offense is the best defense, I guess.
Osama had asked a question. India is also taking steps to incorporate the corporate or private sector to make investments in defense-related production, and they have shown good progress in improving the defense manufacturing-related capacity. Shouldn't a similar approach be encouraged in Pakistan by creating a civil-military fusion instead of relying on the military only to solely carry out such initiatives? I think this is what I said. We need to have public-private partnerships. ये इस पे से कोई denial नहीं है. Alone military cannot do much because then they are not trained for this technological advantage. I cannot refuse you, sir. आप तो intervene करें ना, sir.
Years back, under the auspices of CISS, this was sponsored by the Defense Export Promotion Organization, and we had a lot of private enterprises. There are already many private enterprises which you don't know. For instance, Va Nobel, and there are so many other entities which are not known, who are contributing in various ways. Some are producing complete systems, some are producing components which are used then by the defense industry. So it's not that this area is totally blank in Pakistan. There is definitely more scope for this, but the people are cognizant of this, and there are efforts being made to make use of the potential of the private entrepreneurs and the private industries and their specializations. Thank you.
Okay. डॉक्टर शबाना का सवाल कोई आंसर करना चाहता है आप में से जी प्लीज
Quickly, I think every time you're investing in armament, you are taking away from human security. So especially in South Asia, in Pakistan, I'm a firm believer that we should be investing less in armament and more in the people. Once you invest in people, it will give back to you. You know, it will add to your national power and to your military and defense power as well. As far as China-Pakistan cooperation is concerned, yes, China is one of the few countries that is willing to cooperate with Pakistan. They have done so vis-a-vis nuclear energy and hypersonic. China has the technology, so it is possible they will do it, but the question still remains that can Pakistan afford to invest in this technology, because Pakistan cannot afford to get into an arms race, weapon for weapon. We should always look for effective, cheaper, cost-effective counter strategies for expensive weapons. Thank you so much.
I would like to add very short to our question. Ma'am, see, I believe that there should be compartmentalization of budgeting, where if we are spending a portion on armament, we have to spend on the education and on social services separately. We cannot take out from the defense and then give it to education, and similarly we can't take out from the education or from the development and give it to the armament. I think every sector has its own responsibilities. We are well lucky enough to have a good defense industry that is at par with a lot of other developed nations, but our education system, our social services, they're lagging behind. It's not because we are overspending on defense or something, but that's because the priorities are not right in the education sector. The people that are running the education or the non-traditional aspect, the low politics, I think they have this lack of sincerity with their own domains. That's why we are lagging behind in those sectors. So I think we should, and the Japanese, there's a Japanese proverb that says that it's better to be a warrior in a garden than be a gardener in a war. We have a belligerent enemy on our east. We have problems with a lot of our neighbors and regional countries. I think we should be armed enough to deter possible attacks on our, be it conventional or nuclear, instead of, totally going for peace and then ignoring the defense. I think that's not a wise idea, according to me. You might disagree.
लग रहा है ना SPD वाले think tank का मैम का जो था क्वेश्चन था कि नॉन काइनेटिक उसका जो इम्पैक्ट है कॉस्ट बेनिफिट एनालिसिस इस पे करें कि उसमें और उसमें look at the collaboration with China. Yes, there's a concept जब ये technologies evolve हो रही हैं कि having offensive technology is more costly than having a shielding technology. तो वो strikers and shielders का जो concept है कि if you want to be a striker, so you will have to invest more in these technologies, but if you are a shielder, you can develop concepts, you can come up with defensive strategies. तो वो cost benefit उसमें ज़्यादा आता है, उसमें defensive में होता है. जो चाइना वाला फैक्टर है उस पर आई वुड जस्ट इट्स माय ओपिनियन और वो आप कोट ना करें तो अच्छी बात है, कई लोगों को पसंद नहीं आएगा कि वी रिलाई एवरीथिंग ऑन, जैसे हाइपरसोनिक का भी आया तो वी विल हैव टू कोलैबोरेट विद चाइना. वी आर ऑल स्टूडेंट्स ऑफ IR, दे आर नो परमानेंट फ्रेंड्स, ठीक है. सो वी वर वेरी क्लोज टू यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स इन 60s, इसी तरह था, और अभी हम चाइना को उस तरह से कह रहे हैं. And once you are talking about these emerging technologies, how can you outsource this very critical area to a third country? वो आज आपका दोस्त है, 10 साल के बाद क्या आपके ताल्लुकात होते नहीं होते. तो जब वो आर्मी साइबर कमान का, मैं इसलिए पब्लिक कह रहा हूँ क्योंकि वो PDV पे चलाया गया था कि आर्मी साइबर कमान इस्टेब्लिश हुई और उसके ऊपर बोर्ड लगा हुआ हुआवे का, ठीक है. So how you ensure integrity of that army cyber command if a third country is helping you establish that? Do you think that they will give you that autonomy कि आप उस पर सारा करेंगे और उसमें कुछ चीज़ नहीं होगी, उसको कभी वो यूज़ अपने इंटरेस्ट में नहीं करेंगे? तो ये हमारा एक कल्चर, जो स्ट्रेटेजिक कल्चर है कि एक वी नीड टू थिंक अबाउट इट कि इफ़ यू वांट टू रिमेन अपना एक डिग्री ऑफ ऑटोनॉमी, एब्सोल्यूट ऑटोनॉमी कोई नहीं है, तो कुछ चीज़ें आपको खुद करनी पड़ेंगी, ठीक है. और वो इकोसिस्टम का जो बात की डॉक्टर नासिर हफीज़ ने, बिल्कुल ठीक है. और क्वेश्चन है, आई डोंट डिसएग्री विद यू एंड वी कैन कंटिन्यू टू डिस्कस. ये जो आपने हाथ दोबारा उठाया था लेकिन टाइम ख़त्म हो गया. लेकिन यू हैव टू टेक अ स्टार्ट ना, ठीक है. जब आप कहेंगे जी पहले हम कमेटी बना लेंगे, उसके बाद हम करेंगे, फिर हम देखेंगे, फिर वो नहीं होता. जो डॉक्टर नासिर का जो है कि जी आपका एजुकेशन सिस्टम, नो डिसएग्रीमेंट, yes, absolutely, the kind of product that you will bring out of schools and colleges, university, उसी तरह का product आपको society में मिलेगा. लेकिन there is another point of view कि आजकल जो ये basic cyber जो software programs है, ये ChatGPT और AI से ये इस discipline वाले बच्चे खुद बना रहे हैं उस पर. So वो जो एक concept है किसी बात के जी आपको calculator use नहीं करना, because आपको जब तक बेसिक मैथ्स नहीं आएगी तो आप आगे नहीं चलेंगे, तो फिर कैलकुलेटर आपको अलाउ कर दिया बिकॉज यू नीड टू थिंक बियॉन्ड दैट. तो अभी भी जो हम मैथ्स पे ठीक है, इट्स फंडामेंटल, लेकिन आई थिंक द वे दीज टेक्नोलॉजीज आर इवॉल्विंग, आपको बेसिक से ज़्यादा आपको आगे क्रिएटिविटी की तरफ लाना है, बिकॉज जो मैथ्स में बहुत अच्छा है ज़रूरी नहीं है सॉफ्टवेयर इंजीनियर या क्वांटम इंजीनियर भी उतना ही अच्छा हो. इट्स ऑल अबाउट क्रिएटिविटी और नए नए आइडियाज़ के उस पर कर रहे हैं. लेकिन नो डिसएग्रीमेंट ऑन दैट कि आपको जो भी सिस्टम लाना है उसमें क्वालिटी जब तक नहीं लाएंगे, इस तरह की क्रिएटिविटी नहीं लाएंगे, तो आपको सोल्यूशंस नहीं मिलेंगे उसमें. क्विकली अबाउट सेकेंड स्ट्राइक कैपेबिलिटी का, प्लीज़ डोंट रीड मी रॉन्ग कि आई एम समहाउ मैं उसको अपोज कर रहा हूँ. नो, द आर्गुमेंट इज every country has to see its own resources, ठीक है. और आप जब इस स्ट्रेटेजिक डिबेट को कंटेक्चुअलाइज करते हैं साउथ एशिया में, यू डू नॉट हैव टू रेप्लिकेट एवरीथिंग व्हाट वाज एप्लीकेबल इन कोल्ड वॉर मॉडल सोवियत यूनियन यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स के अंदर है, ठीक है. तो जब सेकंड स्ट्राइक की कैपेबिलिटी आती है तो इट डजंट मीन दैट आपने न्यूक्लियर पावर्ड सबमरीन ही बनाना है. कैन यू अफोर्ड दैट? इंडिया ने 80s में शुरू किया, अभी भी आर्यान ऑपरेशन हुई है 40 years. दे स्पेंड $40 billion और रिसर्च वगैरह के निकाल के, ईच पीस कॉस्टिंग अराउंड मोर देन $5 billion. Do you have that kind of money to invest and do you have that time period of 30-40 years? हम उनसे ज़्यादा efficient है. We tend to believe that. हम आधे 20 साल में बना लेंगे. हम उनसे ज़्यादा चाइनीज़ हेल्प लेके आप उसको $2 billion में बना लोगे, लेकिन you don't need one nuclear powered submarine. You need to have a fleet of that to have that short second strike capability. On the other hand, if you can come up with creative solutions, जिसमें आप जिस तरह की भी सेकेंड स्ट्राइक कैपेबिलिटी ला के एक अनसर्टेनिटी बना देते हैं, वो डीजल पावर्ड है जो भी है वट एवर इट इज़, लेकिन एक जनरल किदवाई जब कहते हैं वी हैव अ सेकेंड स्ट्राइक कैपेबिलिटी, तो डिटर्रेंस इज ऑल अबाउट कॉन्सेप्ट्स. वी शुड बिलीव इन दैट वी हैव इनफ capability to inflict that damage to our adversary rather than parroting that narrative, no जी short second strike होगी. होगा क्या? You build that narrative, resources भी आपको मिल जाएंगे. कहाँ से आएंगे? वो कहीं ना कहीं से तो आपको डाइवर्ट होके आएंगे. So as future scholars, please get out of that syndrome कि India is doing this, so we have to do this. India is looking for अपना status के आपने अपनी एक उसके करके जो minimum आप कर सकते हैं, creativity ला सकते हैं अपने concepts में, that is where you should work, or emerging technologies gives you that advantage. Drones का quickly बताओ क्योंकि drones पे हम बहुत बात करते हैं. I wrote something about it. एकदम से किसी ने मुझे कहा कि you don't know anything कि हम PF में क्या कुछ कर रहे हैं drones में, so आपने तो उसका mention ही नहीं किया. Nobody denies that. लेकिन ये technology ये तो नहीं कि आपने कुछ drones ले लिए and that's it. Ukraine Russia war में every month 10,000 drones destroy हो रहे हैं. नेटो ने 1 million ड्रोन्स उनको प्रॉमिस किया है यूक्रेन को, ठीक है, और 300,000 ड्रोन्स रशिया बना रहा है हर मंथ फॉर दिस वॉर. सो देयर इज सो मच इसके अंदर वैरायटी ऑफ ड्रोन्स के, वो जो कैटेगरी 5 हम कहते हैं 1 2 3 4 5, तो 1 2 3 वाले तो कमर्शियली अवेलेबल स्मॉल ड्रोन्स है. इसराइल जो गज़ा में क्या करे, बैकपैक में 4-5 ड्रोन्स लेके वो केव्स में या उस एरियाज़ में लेके जाते हैं जो डिस्ट्रॉय भी हो जाए. So there's so much to learn about these technologies. और अगर हम उससे defensive हो जाए ना, we have done enough. We are operating drones, so that means we are limiting it. We don't need to think beyond that. So that's my point कि we need to think deeper about it. अच्छा, जो मैडम आपने सवाल पूछा था जो मैंने पहले कर दिया था स्पेस का, principally all countries agree it's a common heritage और स्पेस को मिलिटराइज नहीं होना चाहिए, मेजर पावर्स भी करें. लेकिन रियलिटी इज़ द मेजर पावर्स आर competing to have that space dominance, जिसके अंदर मुख्तलिफ वो चीज़ें अपनी इंट्रोड्यूस कर रहे हैं. वेपन्स अभी तक नहीं लाए, तो वो एक प्रिवेंशन ऑफ आर्म्स रेस इन आउटर स्पेस कॉन्फ्रेंस ऑन डिसआर्ममेंट में बहुत पुराना एक इशू चल रहा है, जिस पे सारे प्रिंसिपली एग्री करते हैं लेकिन निगोशिएट नहीं करते बिकॉज उनके इंटरेस्ट में नहीं है, ठीक है. तो येस, एज अ मैटर ऑफ प्रिंसिपल इट शुड, बट इट वॉन्ट. This is where we live in a real world. They wouldn't want that kind of. अच्छा, पाक चाइना पे मैं कह दिया एजुकेशन सिस्टम है. सॉरी आई स्पोक मोर देन माय यंग कोलीग और which I shouldn't have. लेकिन these are some of the issues that we learn by discussing. And I'm very grateful to SVI for providing this opportunity, for holding this event. I'm sure कि कुछ थोड़ा थोड़ा आप लोग लेके घर जाएंगे और इन चीज़ों के बारे में सोचेंगे, because ideas की game है. It's intellectual mass that you have to bring out. you do not have resources, money nahi hai, you do not have technology. So what you have is intellectual mass. At least usko agar hum apna use karen, so we might come up with some counter strategies. Thank you very much, and round of applause for my panelists.
Now, I'd like to invite Dr. Salik to please present souvenirs to the moderator and the speakers. I would first request speakers also. Okay. I would request Ms. Ghazala to please receive the souvenir first. Then Mr. Ahmad Ali. Mr. Ali Abbas. And Dr. Adil Sultan. Okay. With this, thank you, sir. Sure, sir.
Like to make a brief statement. As I said in the beginning in my introductory remarks, that this conference is all about youngsters. That is why you would see the young speakers in all the panels. We do have senior experts as moderators. The temptation is always there that whenever you have a expert there, the tendency is to ask questions from them. What I would request you to challenge these younger scholars. Making a presentation is not a challenge. Dealing with the questions is the real challenge. So ask your questions from the younger scholars and spare the moderators at least for a day because you keep hearing them in many forums and you have ample opportunities to ask questions from them. So I am sure this point will be noted for future panels. Thank you.
With this, we conclude our first session. I'd like to thank all the speakers and the moderator for contributing to this very important discourse. I'd kindly request all the participants to please be seated as we are going to proceed with our second session. Thank you so much.